It was March 26, 1991. It had been raining since the beginning of the day in South Korea. Also, on this day, it was election day for the whole country, including the city of Daegu, where the only thing that was talked about and broadcasted in the media was the elections. But in this city, in the late gloomy afternoon, 6 boys decided to go climb a mountain situated near the city's military base that was not so far from their houses to look for salamander eggs. They had gone to this mountain many times before, so nothing was out of the ordinary. Once there, it suddenly started raining really hard as a huge storm came in. The boys listened to the rain splashing against the ground at such a hard rhythm that it sounded like wood crackling in a fire. They could also detect the bangs that the lightning would make as it forcefully and repeatedly fractured the ground. All of that was accompanied by the wind who was shrieking through the boys' ears like a crazy old lady. But even if the weather was against them, the boys decided to continue their hunt for salamander eggs. There was an abnormal scent of moisture and decayed dead animals that was roaming around in the forest while the boys were hunting. As they walked through this public path that led to the top of the mountain, they examined their surroundings for salamander eggs. The place was isolated by a bunch of gigantic, sad, horrifying and spooky leafless trees. Also, there were all sorts of other dead vegetations that hung their branches downward screaming for help, for someone to give them life. After walking for almost an hour, the sky had filled up with numerous clouds. The sky was pitch black and not a single ray of light could pass through. The boys had gotten surrounded by fog and they couldn't perceive anything clearly. At this point, one of the boys decided to head back home alone because his mom had told him to come back before it became too dark. But the other boys stayed and decided to get closer to the military base and start looking for bullet casings.
During this time, some of the parents had received a call. Hi, I was just calling because your son and his friends didn't show up to class today. They usually never miss class. Announced Miss Soa, the taekwondo teacher.
Oh, well, I didn't know. Thank you, I'll go check if everything's okay.
Answered the dad, a little anxious. It wasn't like the boys' personality to skip class.
All of the boys' parents were looking for them around the neighborhood, asking people for information about where they could be or if anyone had seen them. They then went into town where they met with one of the boys' brother, who told them that they had gone up the mountain to find salamander eggs. Up the mountain was a pond, where on one side was a military base and on the other side was a farm. They all went up the mountain and looked for them. After hours of looking around, they decided to call the police. The police did not give too many thoughts about it, telling them that they would probably come back. Days later, they received a call from an anonymous caller saying that they had the kids and wanted money for their release, asking them to meet at a remote location to make the trade. Of course, the parents and the police went with the money, but no one showed up. The media then got involved. On May 4th, the boys' parents appeared on a TV show where you could receive calls. They wanted to get information and get the word out. They got a call from the elementary school where the boys were attending at the time. The caller claimed to be one of them. They later found out that the call had been a prank all along. That's when people started to get interested. Many theories around the case were circulating at the time, talking about spies, kidnapping, and even an alien abduction. The case had gained a massive amount of attention, so the police finally started investigating. The president even got involved. He had 300,000 police and military people as well as volunteers search the mountain about 500 times. Nothing was found at the time. Witnesses came forward. Some had seen them, and others had heard screams coming from the mountain. The parents soon noticed that the police had not been investigating the boys' case. They decided to buy a truck, quit their jobs, and went on the road for 3 years to look for the boys. After years of investigating, the case had become irrelevant to most, while the parents were drowning in a sea of grief. As the hype on the case died down, the parents were contacted by the military. Most believed that the military had something to do with the boys' disappearance, because on the mountain where the boys had disappeared was the military shooting base. Also, the police absolutely refused to look into them. The military asked the parents to come to the military base and supposedly gave them superpowers to help find the boys. It was obviously all fake. That added a lot of suspicion on the military because the parents and public never understood why the military would waste their parents' time and make them come to the military base to lie and play with them. Later, on January 12th, a man who claimed to be a psychology teacher who analyzed the case was convinced that one of the boys' dad had murdered all of them and had hidden the bodies in his house. The police searched the house with no trace of any of the boys.
Years later, on the cloudy but bright day of September 26, 2002, a happy local couple was hiking on the mountain not too far from the boys' house. They were heading back home when the woman heard a weird crackling noise from stepping on a firm, thorny object. Looking down underfoot, she noticed a bushy barred bone sticking out from the moist ground. After taking a better look at what could have been a dead animal, she noticed there were some old clothes and shoes surrounding the area, indicating her that this was without a doubt a crime scene. Police were called. As soon as they arrived on the crime scene, they knew it was that case from 11 years ago. They could tell by the multiple small bones and tiny, dirty, musty clothes scattered around. They called the parents for them to come and finally have some sort of closure about where their children are and maybe find an answer to what happened to them. Most parents would rather die than be digging up their child's corpse, but after all those years, they didn't even care anymore. All they wanted to do was find something that might help solve the case. So they came all dressed in black, and they started digging and searching, helping the police. After hours of finding bones, clothes, bullet casings, but no answers, police ended up calling forensic experts, which were not called at the start as they should have been. When the experts arrived, they were shocked at how the police botched the crime scene, placing bones by sort instead of placing them by bodies, letting parents touch and undo things that shouldn't have been undone. It was a total mess. If the parents had known the repercussions of what they were doing, they would have let the expert do their job, but no one told them that their actions would make everything harder to find the cause of death. Even though the experts knew what they were doing, after 11 years and the terrible work of the police, they couldn't find anything. The case was old news, but the police still wanted to announce the cause of death to finally close the case. Without any evidence except the fact that it was rainy and a little bit cold that night, the police announced that the cause of death was hypothermia. All along the case, police weren't helpful and the parents knew that this was not the truth, so they approached experts from the US to help them maybe find something new. After looking into it, experts were sure that hypothermia wasn't really how they died for multiple reasons. First of all, they were really close to their houses, so if they were that cold, they could have gone home easily. Not just that, it was between 3 and 5 degrees that night, so the chances of them freezing are very low. On top of that, the remains were buried. We can know that because all the remains and bones were at the same place. If they had died on top of the ground, animals would have picked at them and the bones would have been scattered everywhere. Also, someone probably would have found them earlier. Later, when the professional examined the bones, they found bullet holes in them and sharp cuts on them, which after close inspections turned out to be man-made before they died.
Since then, there have been a lot of theories speculating on what could have happened to the 5 boys during that mysterious night of their disappearance. One of those theories, in which we believe is the closest to reality, is the theory of the military man. On the same gloomy night that the boys went missing, there was a soldier that was practicing his shooting all alone under the rain at the military base right next to the place where the boys vanished. This man was alone there because, since it was election day, it was a holiday for all of the military personnel and they didn't have to come to the base unless they wanted to. The soldier who was there was a very awkward, introverted person and had a mental illness. Furthermore, he had an advanced case of leprosy. Leprosy is a viral disease that attacks a person's nerves and leads to the loss of this person's extremities. In the time period in which the event took place, there was a myth going around that leprosy could be cured by eating a child's liver. The man in question had a monstrous appearance. His body was covered with nasty red blotches from leprosy, and the end of his limbs were turning black and about to die. People considered this man dangerous because he didn't have much to lose. The theory goes on to say that while the soldier was practicing shooting outside, he would have seen the 5 boys walking all alone together. Then, the man would have pointed his gun at the boys, and suddenly, without any warning, he would have started shooting. He shot, and shot, and shot, and shot, until all the boys were lifeless. Subsequently, the military man would have picked up their bodies and brought them back to the base. Once there, he would have gotten a knife, and he would have hideously cut open their stomachs. He would have grabbed their livers with his bare hands and started to slowly eat their livers, who had a sickening taste while the kid's blood dripped all over him. We can support this fact by the man-made cuts that were found in the bones years later. After his meal, the soldier would have gone back into the spooky mountain where he first saw the boys, and he would have buried their bodies and clothes underneath the ground 200 meters away from the military base. Finally, this monster of a man would have left the place and gone back to his home unnoticed. All of this information about this man was leaked throughout the years, but police never released the identity of that military shooter that signed in that day.